Good afternoon. It's just after 1:30 on Monday, March the 2nd. We're here for a Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee work session with the Council President and Councilmember Giwando, and we have our Council staff and planning here for the first item on our agenda, which is Zoning Text Amendment 2514, Optional Method, Public Benefits Overlay Zone. And with that, I would like to turn over to Ms. Nadeau, and we can walk through the packet.
Okay, good afternoon, committee. So ZTA 2514 might look a little familiar to you. What it will do is it will apply the new optional method public benefit standards that were adopted in 2505. So as a reminder, when the committee and then the council reviewed that ZTA, planning and council staff had recommended you adopt the new system and then give us time to do a careful look at each overlay zone. The reason is some overlay zones are very specific about how to apply the public benefits. After doing that, there were 5 identified zones. It's Bethesda, Downtown Silver Spring, Germantown Transit Mixed Use, Great Seneca Life Sciences, and then the Transferable Development Rights Zone. So the council had a public hearing. The only speaker was the planning department. Also received several impact statements. OLO found that the anticipated racial equity, social justice impact was indeterminate, since we're not sure what mix of public benefits applicants would seek to provide. The planning board recommended approval with a few minor amendments that I'll get to later. And then the climate assessment found that since this is technical rather than policy driven, there are little to no impact on our climate goals. So I'm jumping to page 3 now, and I'll just sort of briefly go through all the different changes being made in the ZTA since it is kind of lengthy. So first, broadly speaking, the first thing added towards the beginning of the ZTA is clarifying that any additions, prohibitions, or modifications to public benefits must be made in a ZTA. I do want to note here, of course, with master plans, they often say to prioritize certain public benefits. That would not need a ZTA, but if you want to actively change them, then you need that accompaniment. And then next, changing all references to public benefit points to incentive density, because that's how the new system works. Next is the payment in lieu rate. The word contribute was changed to make a payment in lieu, just to make it clear when it was saying contribution, that's the payment being referred to. And this brings us to the first recommended amendment at the bottom of page 3. So historically in the county, and the ZTA is introduced, said to use the Engineering News Records Baltimore Construction Cost Index to determine inflation rates. This is what's been used in the past. It's what the Department of Finance uses for transportation and school impact taxes. That's why it was in here. But after receiving feedback, Planning Board recommended that we should not use a specific publication in case it goes out of business, stops doing updates. And so the amendment at the top of page 4 is just more general language that would say by the cumulative increase or decrease in a published construction cost index over the prior 2 calendar years. This language is used in the Bethesda and the Downtown Silver Spring overlay, so it's not completely new to the zoning ordinance.
Without objection?
Okay. Next is the Bethesda overlay zone. So the first thing the ZTA does is it awards a pro rata share of incentive density for projects that fall between tiers. This is something that existed before, and that language is being updated to reflect the new system. Similarly, in the BOZ, acronym for Bethesda Overlay Zone, I think it sounds cooler, but it allows applicants who provided more than 15% MPDUs to provide one less public benefit, and those who provided 20% MPDUs to provide no additional benefit. This is not needed under the new system, which uses tiers, so that would happen automatically anyways, so that language has been removed. And then section 492C4 is a somewhat lengthy section in the ZTA and has several different provisions. I can go through them pretty quickly here. So C4A removes the transit proximity language because that is not a public benefit in the new system. It updates the language regarding the park impact payment, since the department is shifting from counting incentive density to making a payment towards the CIP. Language about building standards is updated to say you must meet tier 1. One that, and I'll slow down here for a second, for 492C4D, there's language in the BOS about providing public benefits if you're doing affordable housing. I want to clarify here that, or emphasize, that this is separate from MPDUs. So that existed in the overlay before. So retaining that public benefit, but updating it to meet the current tiers under the new system. Similarly, adding tier 2 benefits for design excellence. The next 2 or 3 here, what's happening is there's still this environmental public benefit and updating building codes, but updating the terms to energy efficiency and design excellence. Lastly, the public art benefit, that is now a standard benefit, and so it's doesn't need to be called out in the overlay. So those are all the changes to the Bethesda overlay zone. I will note for the outreach piece of it that I know that planning met with the implementation team in Bethesda that I'm blanking on the name of and explained all of this to them, and they seemed in agreement.
Sounds good. Any questions, concerns? All right, let's continue.
Okay. The next overlay zone is the downtown Silver Spring overlay. Since the new system only applies to incentive density, you no longer need to reference public benefits in the DSS density section. As a reminder, DSS density is our downtown Silver Spring density that allows developers to pay fees to the Civic Improvement Fund to get more density. The next section here is 497C4, which is where most of the public benefits were housed in the downtown overlay zone for Silver Spring. Again, transit proximity being removed because it's no longer a public benefit. Updating the reference to exceptional design points to tier 2 in the design excellence category. And then removing an incentive to provide on-site open space where it's not identified in the master plan, and then prohibiting receiving incentive density for making an off-site contribution for open space unless it exceeds the minimum necessary. So that's Silver Spring.
See any questions? Let's continue.
Okay. Next is the Germantown Transit Mixed Use Zone, which only had one incentive density thing to update. So in the Germantown Transit Mixed Use Overlay Zone, you have to purchase BLT easements or make payments to ALPF, our Agricultural Land Preservation Fund, and an amount equal to 50% of the incentive density floor area. Planning staff does note, and council staff agrees, that this is a higher requirement than in much of the county, but the intent of this ZTA was to just make these updates. Planning board did not recommend lowering this at this time because they are currently working on the Germantown Sector Plan Amendment, which the council is expected to receive in December 2026.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Any questions? Go ahead.
All right. Next up is the Great Seneca Life Sciences Overlay Zone. So this one is interesting because if you'll remember last year, I believe we were on the 7th floor. This overlay zone was being worked at the exact same time that we got this whole new incentive density system. And so it included basically the system that the council ended up adopting. So what's happening here is removing a lot of the repetitive language. And so if you look at page 7, there's a fairly long list here. So 1, requiring LSC zone properties to be reviewed under optional method, modifying the FAR awarded at each tier. This is because there's larger tract sizes in the Great Seneca overlay, and since small amounts of FAR could mean higher amounts of your density, it's just accounting for that tract size. Same thing with the fee and lieu payments. Establishing incentives for certain percentages of residential development, lowering the square footage amount for adaptive reuse, There's a lot of language about very specific infrastructure projects that are called out in that plan. And then adding additional compliance requirements for neighborhood services and mixed use, including providing something called flexible setup space, which allows for more flexible, scalable commercial real estate, which of course makes sense in the Great Seneca Life Sciences Zone. Here we have one other proposed amendment. It's really a technical correction. Brochart Road was spelled incorrectly, so we will update that as well.
Okay, don't see any questions. Let's continue.
All right, and then the final overlay zone is the transferable development rights overlay zone. So previously, the board granted up to 20 public benefit points for providing TDRs. The ZTA would remove this provision since that is no longer a public benefit under the new public benefit system.
Okay. Continue.
And that is it for overlay zones. So lastly is a grandfathering provision. So with ZTA 2505, as you know, projects can sometimes take a while to develop, and they might need to refer to the old system if that's what they were under when they applied. So in ZTA 2505, a new section was added to the code that basically took all the old language and just moved it to the end. And so something similar is going to happen with these overlay zones where all the old language will move. Some of the formatting might look different because there's just a lot of indenting in the zoning ordinance, you know, your section 4, 7, A, B, 1, 2, et cetera. And so the formatting will look different, but in substance, all that language will just be grandfathered to the end.
All right, sounds good. This is sponsored and introduced by this committee, so obviously there is support here. This is the second part of the ongoing conversation that we've had in working with the planning department and thinking through how do we find the right balance of getting projects, getting the housing and investment and amenities that we want and jobs that we're seeking, and public benefits when redevelopment occurs, and how to make sure that those public benefits reflect both local community needs but also countywide priorities. That's a challenging balance, and there's a lot of needles to thread. But I do think that this new system is much more reflective of our current and modern public policy priorities and is much more reflective of what I actually think are the benefits that the public are expecting, and accomplish it in a way that is reasonable, not obstructive to what we want and to what we want to do. I did just want to note, we did get a memo from the district council member about the BLT question, asking for us, not necessarily in the context of a specific amendment on this zoning text amendment, but to take up this issue related to Germantown, which will be part of the Germantown sector plan, but also more broadly as well, the question of TDRs and BLTs. That is embedded in this conversation, but it is an ongoing conversation that we have had and have to continue to have. I agree with her. She's asked for us to, have that conversation in earnest and try to come up with some resolutions to address both of those systems. They're key to what has established the agricultural reserve in Montgomery County and the land use pattern that we have set up. But it requires us to take a look and address some of these challenges, both cost dynamics related to Germantown in particular, but of building more generally, and land preservation initiatives and efforts that we have undertaken. So we're in conversation about that. We will follow up on that, but did just want to note that here as well. Not sure colleagues have any comments or questions. Want to appreciate the collaborative work of colleagues on this ongoing effort. As I said, this is really just the current implementation of what has been an ongoing effort to address these public benefit dynamics. And although it's a little bit dry in terms of the subject matter and has been a long-standing dynamic, I really do think it is really at the heart of what we do here at this committee of trying to find these balances. And I think doing it in a collaborative way in this particular case, as we have, is a really positive signal and message that we're sending to the public, to those who are investing in our community, whether they're a business or a resident, those who live here, those who work here, those who want to make decisions to build things here. So With that, we'll take a vote. All those in favor of the ZTA as amended, please raise your hand. That is unanimous, and we will forward this along to our friend here, the council president, to get on the agenda. And with that, thank you, Ms. Nadeau, for all of your work on this and the broader effort. We really do appreciate your efforts. Great. We're going to move on to item 2. We're going to welcome up our council staff, Mr. Mia, and we have a number of folks for the next 2 items from our housing department and from our partner agencies. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Mr. Mia, as Director Bruton and the team join us here at the dais.
All right, sounds good. Today we'll be covering 2 CIP subcategories that are administered by DHCA, the Community Development CIP and the Housing CIP subcategories. The Community Development subcategory is funded by the executive, recommended at $6.3 million, which is a $2.1 million reduction from the previously approved CIP, and that reduction is primarily due to some projects being completed in the earlier FY25, FY26 period. On the housing side, the executive is recommending $160 million over the 6 years, which at first glance looks like a significant reduction from the previously approved, but it's really significant one-time funds moving out of the CIP 6-year period. So essentially, the funding level is normalizing to pre-one-time fund levels. As has been traditional, the committee typically defers recommending the housing subcategory of the CIP until operating budget is released. That's because the HIF operating budget contains significant funding for housing as well that affects the CIP. So we can do a preview of what's in the CIP, but that might change after March 15th, depending on the executive's final recommendations on the operating side. DHCA does have a slide presentation, about 14 slides that they can cover in about 10 minutes. So that will cover most of the material in the packet. You don't want to?
Sorry, Scott Bruton, Director, Department of Housing and Community Affairs. We provided this slide just for reference for answering questions.
Sounds good. So the slide deck is available and is there. We can turn it over to the department, however, and feel free to hit on the key points that you want from the presentation or otherwise. Director Bruton.
Did you want to go through the recommendations one by one, or?
Why don't you do the overview, and then I can jump in.
Okay.
Sure. And feel free to turn it over to members of your team as you see fit, but we can go through the recommendations one by the department.
Sorry, I was expecting Mr. Mia to go through through all the different ones. Let's go ahead and have you go through the individual ones, and then we can add texture.
Okay, sorry for the confusion. Let's do that. Having said the overview.
Thank you.
So again, we'll go through the community development projects first. There are 3. The countywide facade easement program, which the executive is recommending 6-year funding of $3.4 million. Really, the cost change is due to addition of FY31-32, this level of effort. On page 3 of the packet, we have a list of completed projects to date in FY24 and 25, as well as projects that are currently in progress and planned for FY27. So staff does recommend approval as recommended by the executive on this one.
Anything to add from the department on that? It seems like a pretty straightforward item, but I want to turn it to you, and then I can turn to colleagues.
Absolutely agree. Very, very straightforward.
Yeah. Great. Councilmember Girondo.
Yes. Yeah, I just want to always appreciate. I think this is a program that punches above its weight, and it always does really good work. And just if there's anything that you wanted to share about where we are, what has happened between this year and last year, I think we can wait. Budget time is usually a good time to just hear. I just think there's so many places that could use this, and I always like to underscore that. I've seen these projects go forward, and so it's kind of a pat on the back, but also just your opportunity if there's anything that you'd like to highlight about what's happened between this year and last.
Mark, would you like to? So I'll introduce Mark Diocampo, the new manager
Maybe
of
first
our
time
neighborhood
for the committee too.
Yeah.
I'm always trying to get someone new in, so that's good.
Thank you very much, council members. Again, Mark Diocampo, the manager for neighborhood revitalization for DHCA. And yes, I thank you very much. I am relatively new to the department, but not new to Montgomery County, not at all, as I see this Fanny Gonzalez is saying. So the programs that we have here, the focus neighborhood communities, we are in the process of working on two new projects that are going to do revitalization to Winchester West, to Kennebec communities. These are important for providing life safety and ADA and health issues, including lighting and access to their residents. This allows for current residents to stay in their facilities.
I think we're talking about two separate things here. Those are
the
good
facade
projects,
improvement. Okay,
but,
yeah, countywide facade improvement. Yes. So the countywide facade improvements. Actually, there's in the current program that we have here. We have currently about $2.1 million in our budget, and we're looking to continue on with projects, particularly focused on the Purple Line. As you know, that the Purple Line will be up and coming in terms of operation, and there are a lot of businesses that were affected along the way. And as you can see here, there's Cafe, which was just newly completed, which is a
local treasure.
Local treasure, and one of those businesses that truly did suffer an impact with regards to its access and customer base. This was something that we felt was important to then extend to the rest of the businesses, small businesses, and other industries that were along the Purple Line corridor. We are also working together with the owner of the former Dennison's brewery to bring that to have that move forward to a new use again as a brewery. And then in our FY 2027 goals, we are continuing to move forward with our general countywide facade improvements, primarily focused on many of the older shopping plazas that are throughout the county. But we also realize too that there are many areas throughout the county that have gone through a sector plan process, and some of those older, more traditional types of retail and restaurant establishments, as well as mixed-use development establishments, can benefit from this program to go and enliven them and bring them up to the 21st century.
I appreciate that, and I see in here, which I read also, there's a $600,000 grant that came from the state.
Correct.
So we'll get that, which is great. Are these projects pretty much full out? Because I know in previous years, or if someone is like, hey, I want to get mine in the queue, is there any capacity at this point?
So actually, this is a very popular program.
I know that.
We have more applicants than we do actual budget to go around. But I think that we're really going to be ramping up a lot, especially as we get closer to the opening of the Purple Line.
Got it. Well, I appreciate that, and it's popular because it's really good, and it makes a huge difference for the. One of the things I've been meaning to mention is it will be good at some point to do like an economic analysis of where we've done these and how has it impacted. Even if it's just a survey or a sample, nothing that's too onerous, that doesn't cost us a ton of money, but I've just seen anecdotally it improve, customers coming and that kind of thing. And it's one of those, it's a great program. So thank you for the update. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, appreciate it. When you do that analysis, I think it would be helpful to see what other investments happen. I mean, there is a 50% match. There is a matching dynamic to this. That's helpful for us to know of like what other investment are we spurring. but also what investments happening outside of that, because I think it's helpful for us to understand that when we invest a little bit here and get state funding and other dynamics, we leverage it. What does it actually leverage into, and then what does that mean for vacancy rates? What does that mean for rents and other dynamics? I think there's all kinds of things that we could look at that are just publicly available data that someone just needs to collect that wouldn't be the heaviest of lifts, but I think could be really helpful. And I would actually suggest that maybe even bringing the research team from planning in on this, because I think they have some tools there to be helpful in this regard that maybe your department is not doing on a daily basis, but they are. And so, that would be an example of some collaboration and coordination that I think could be mutually beneficial.
Thank you.
Great. And welcome. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Don't believe what you hear. We're not so tough here at this committee.
All right. With that said, second project in the community development subcategory is the White Oak Commercial Area Improvements and Revitalization CIP. This was spun off from the Countywide Facade Program about 2 years ago in the last full CIP after state aid was awarded. The executive is recommending a 6-year funding level of $2.2 million. And initially, the project had a defined scope within certain parts of White Oak. That scope is now being expanded for the upcoming 6-year CIP. So council staff does recommend approval as recommended by the executive.
Anything to add? I don't think there are any concerns or objections from colleagues, so we'll take yes for an answer.
Sounds good.
Let's continue.
The third and last project in the subcategory for community development is the facility planning, housing and community development CIP. This is a level of effort, provides $125,000 a year to conduct planning studies to see if they're eligible for CDBG funding and other criteria. Straightforward project, no issues. Staff recommends approval as is.
Yeah, no issues. I have a question on this. Obviously, the federal landscape has changed dramatically. This is a federal program. CDBG, is another example of small investments that have significant impacts. The benefit of CDBG historically has been it's really flexible in general. It gives a lot of leniency in the scheme of federal programs and federal dollars, which are normally very narrowly tailored and specific of how they need to be used by local governments. This is an example of one that's pretty flexible and has always been, an added tool in the toolkit, so to speak, for the department to be able to figure out what's in the best interest of the community, to be flexible, to change it. From time to time, CDBG money has tended to be used for different purposes over, decades. And, we haven't had to create all new programs every single year or 2 or 3 in order to keep up. We just have that level of flexibility. Just curious, one, any concerns about the flexibility, since this is a federal administration that has been imposing all new standards, most of which have been incredibly unhelpful and generally opposed to the values that we have. And 2, concerns about the funding itself here, because we've seen significant cutbacks on these community benefiting programs.
Sure, that's an excellent question. We, based on the budget bill, the non-Department of Homeland Security budget bill that was passed a few weeks ago, we are going to experience a somewhat less than 4% cut in our CDBG funding. Popin, what is the total cut?
So it's about $200,000.
Yeah.
Apologize, Popin Salem. It's about $200,000.
And so that will either, we're working on that, that will either translate into cuts to programs kind of across, or maybe the elimination of a program. We'll need to, determine what's applicable. Like $200,000 is not a small amount of money. As far as our flexibility in using it, the impacts on us, on our program so far, have been more in changing the language we're allowed to use. So this gets back to the executive administration's fixation on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they've put together a list that HUD has to enforce about words that we are not allowed to use. And so we've had to navigate removing certain words from the grants that we provide, while also making sure that we are using the money appropriately to administer and enforce the laws that are passed by the county, through you as the legislative body. And so it is an interesting dance, but we by no means want to forfeit current or future funding, and so we are, navigating this as effectively as we can.
Appreciate that. If you could just get back to us on what the results are of that, of changes that you've had to make and impacts that you have, including the CDBG question of one program eliminated or across the board, evenly felt or somewhat evenly felt cuts to existing programs to absorb that 4%. I mean, it'd just be helpful for our situational awareness. I'll just note on this ridiculousness at the federal level. I was having a conversation not too long ago with somebody who's working on a federal grant who lives in Montgomery County, and they were noting the fact that, and by the way, they work on security-related, homeland security, counterterrorism-related issues, and they were brought into this conversation because there was an edict that came down that the word bias is not allowed to be used. Well, if you're a scientist, you use bias to prevent problems from actually making sure that you actually are, running your test the right way. And unfortunately, there is not a distinction and an understanding of the difference between confirmation bias and implicit bias, which of course are, not the same thing. So I appreciate the challenging dance that you have to go through. I wish you didn't have to go through it, but if you could keep us informed of what that looks like and how you're responding, on the ground in real time, particularly as we take up the budget so we can understand the context of some of those decisions before we get it. I think it would be helpful for us to understand, here's what we're doing, here's why we did it, here's how we're responding. I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Oh, on facilities planning, do you all mind if I take just a couple of minutes to point out some things?
Please.
Mr. Diocampo started to mention earlier that we have started a new initiative to try to help the businesses that have been impacted by the construction of the Purple Line for several years. We've requested federal and state earmarks for this. We will be coming back in future years to request funding so that we can try to assist those businesses as they try to revive and revitalize their customer bases after the Purple Line is finished. And so I wanted to let you know, in case you all want to work with us in any way on that, that we are focused on that as part of this broader program for the entire county. And then I also wanted to bring up that we started through the work that you all initially introduced us to in talking with Tobytown as well as Scotland, African American kinship communities that date back to the late 19th century, that we have engaged in, kind of ongoing interactions and communications. We were very fortunate that one of our neighborhood revitalization staff used to work with the Art and Sculpture Museum that is right next door to Scotland, and she already had some experience with Scotland, and so she is our kind of point person on outreach to the various different kinship communities. We, one of the two University of Maryland graduate assistants that we've hired for programs is devoted to the Kinship Community Initiative and is doing historical research on all the different kinship communities, as well as looking at those that are still extant in kind of whatever context they are. And our goal is to work collaboratively with them to figure out which types of federal, state, and local funding might be available to help them with community revitalization efforts, whether it's housing related or a certain business district or preserving a historic church, things like that. But we're trying, instead of trying to, suggest to them what they should do, we're trying to work collaboratively so that the community can democratically suggest what they would most like to happen. And we consider this an ongoing, initiative on into the future.
I appreciate that. Cindy Gibson's in the room. Appreciate you responding to both of us and coming to meetings and continuing that engagement. I know it's a long-standing, ongoing, relationship-building effort, and I really appreciate that, both for Scotland and Tobytown, but also for all the other kinship communities. I'll just note the Emery Grove community just had a big day yesterday with Johnson's Local Park and some of the efforts that are happening there. And I know the department is very active involved there as well as elsewhere, and the council has been a big part of those efforts as well. So I just want to express my personal appreciation to you.
Yeah, in Emery Grove, we look to providing some gap financing for the housing developments that are in the works in that community.
Yes, and I worked hard on the zoning changes that allowed that to happen, and the prior council moved forward with those efforts. So it really is a collaborative effort with the community, with nonprofits, with the department. So I just appreciate your efforts on that. It's going to take time for us to navigate through these issues and make sure that the communities are in the lead of what they want to do, and I appreciate the way in which you've handled that. So thank you. All right, let's continue.
Okay. Next, we'll turn our attention to the housing CIP subcategory. There are 4 projects. The first one is the traditional affordable housing acquisition preservation CIP. As mentioned, there is a significant reduction in this project due to the one-time funds moving out of the 6-year period. The remaining funding level is $22 million a year, or $132 million over the 6 years. It is funded through taxable HIF bonds, for which debt service is paid through the HIF operating budget, as well as loan repayment proceeds from previously issued loans returning to this project. Traditionally, the committee has deferred a recommendation until after operating budget, given the connection to the HIF. So staff, again, is recommending the same for this year. There's some data in the packet, as well as data from the DHCA's quarterly report from December 31st, describing the loans that have been issued through FY26 on this project. So far, DHCA has closed on 1 loan. As of December 31st, they've closed on 1 loan for 1 project. They've committed to 2 projects and are developing another 2 projects. So altogether, about 5 projects for about $110 million have been are in various stages from this 1 CIP project as of FY26.
I will note, unless something changes between now and the end of FY26, we should have closed on, by the end of the fiscal year, almost $200 million in funding for, in CIP and operating funding and the various different sources we have to produce and preserve affordable housing. And so this will be the largest year ever in Montgomery County as far as units produced or preserved. And we have, if you all will be interested this time around or next time around, we have an incredibly robust pipeline thanks to the funding that the county executive and the council have collaborated together over multiple years to provide for these purposes.
Thank you. Appreciate that update.
The second project is the Affordable Housing Opportunity Fund, or AHOF. The SCAC is recommending a 6-year funding level of $15.5 million. This funding source is loan repayment proceeds, again, returning to this project. The initial $40 million of seed funding for the project have been dispersed, and now it's essentially in loan repayment status for the time being. Again, Council is recommending, since this isn't current revenue or related to the HIF, Council is recommending approval as recommended by executive for this project.
Without objection.
Third project is a nonprofit preservation fund. Similarly, this was $50 million was provided by the council to seed this project. Those dollars have been either committed or dispersed or will be by end of FY26. And so the remaining funding in the project is, again, loan repayment proceeds returning to the project.
Appreciate that. I do think at some point I have heard conversations I know the department has had with applicants about the definition of nonprofit and how that works. And some of these transactions are complicated. They're controlled by a nonprofit, but not necessarily owned, or vice versa. That was an ongoing conversation, as the director very well knows. I convened, I think, a couple dozen meetings, it feels like, over a few years to try to work through the by right pilot dynamics. We even had to have some state law changes in order to create a comfort level with the Department of Finance as well as the department here. I do think that's a conversation that we should continue to navigate through and have. It's not a legislative dynamic. It will be done through the PDF if there were any changes that needed to be made. I don't think we're in a position of needing to do that right now, and there's a question of what funds would be available in the immediate term. But I do think it is a conversation that we ought to continue having and figure out whether any adjustments should be made to the PDF to give you the flexibility and to be reflective of what the intention was, to make sure that this is a preservation program directed towards our nonprofit partners, which is what it was intended to be. This was part of the package with the Housing Production Fund of $100 million, and then the $50 million for our nonprofit preservation funds, and then the nonprofit pilot. That was the three parts of this package, and so just wanted to flag that and note that, and just appreciate the ongoing conversations that are being had, and know that we should revisit it if necessary. Not necessarily today, but certainly can before we approve the operating and capital budget in May.
Agreed. And I think the issues you brought up, the clarification that might help on a few things might be a PDF change of maybe just a few words.
Yeah, exactly.
To facilitate things.
Yeah, we'll follow up on that. I think there's an opportunity for us to think through that and just make sure we're not creating challenges as we're trying to solve them. But I do think, working through the couple word change as needed, if needed, for the PDF before the final approval of the budget, would be appropriate, and the committee will have an opportunity to take that up when we take up the operating budget side.
Sure, and we'll go ahead and draft a suggested thing and work with y'all on figuring that out so that it can be added through the budget process, if you all choose.
Perfect. And I would just request that you circle back to the partners who were involved in the Buy Right pilot conversations and some of the issues that we had. That we had a good group that helped to provide feedback for that. As you well know, you already have that list of those meetings that I had convened that you and Department of Finance and others participated in, the the county attorney. But if you could perhaps get some feedback from that group as well, I think that would be helpful so that we could avoid any other issues and make sure, again, that we're solving the problems.
Will do. Thank you for the recommendation.
Appreciate it. Councilmember Joanna.
Thank you. Yeah, we're glad that it's being utilized, and want to make sure it's targeted the way we intended. And back in 2021, I guess, when that happened, the council staff raised an issue. I just want to allow you to comment on in their recommendation. The committee may wish to discuss future interest from developers for nonprofit preservation sourced loans now that the initial seed funding has been dispersed and relatively smaller amounts of loan repayment proceeds are available in future years. Any comment on that question? Thank you for including it, Mr. Mia. It's a good
Sure. So that comment was meant to address, what the council might see is, given the relatively small amounts coming back, there might be a pause in loan activity until enough money has been accumulated to issue new loans. So we might see, and these are 7-year loan terms, so we might see a couple of years of no activity until that happens. But again, that's a discussion.
Yeah, your thoughts on that? Yeah, it makes sense financially. I don't know if you can think about it more, but it was in the packet, so I wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. We will have, by the end of the fiscal year, expended all the $50 million on preservation projects to nonprofits. As far as trying to think, as far as for next year, trying to think, because the county executive's budget's not out, and I don't personally.
You don't want to share any news. It's not.
Yeah, I don't know. I actually don't personally know the final numbers that'll be.
Councilmember Joanna was trying to see if you would overshare accidentally here, so we get a little preview into what the number is going to be.
Yeah, I wish I knew. I will say that each year we do an analysis of. We share with you all through the quarterly report, but also through monthly kind of sub-reports, what's in our kind of development tracking list or pipeline, for lack of a better phrase. And so, for example, we have 23, it's either 23 or 24 projects in the development tracker that have said they would like to close in FY27.
Great.
Now, our past experience is that not everybody closes because they have
kind of like an RSVP to a party.
Yeah,
yes. Half the people show up.
Right, and so we sometimes it's because they have to wait. There's only so much LIHTC funding through the state at any time,
right.
And so so they may have to wait till another year. That said, and those 23 projects have requested almost $400 million. And I can almost guarantee that the county will not be appropriating $400 million next year. And so we have analyzed the 10 projects most likely to close next year based on their trajectory through our process as well as the state process. And of those 10 projects most likely to close, and probably we won't have enough funding for everyone, so they'll either have to wait another year or we'll have difficult decisions to make. None of those 10 would qualify for the Nonprofit Preservation Fund because none of them are acquisitions of existing affordable housing by a nonprofit. And that's just sort of the roll of the dice. In any other year, it could be, half of them would qualify, and it all depends on, what's coming through the pipeline. And then that said, there could be some that might come up through a right of first refusal, but then that would require funding above and beyond what those 10 projects do. And so as we get to our discussions over, the entirety of the budget, we're happy to brief you all together or individually about what's on the horizon to help you all make the tough choices about your recommendations and how much and in what form you would like to approve the funding that we'll need.
I appreciate that. Obviously, this is a key component, the preservation component of keeping and locking in housing at affordable rates for a long period of time. So you're right, it's a bigger picture, but a key component, and that's helpful background. Thank you. And you did your job well and didn't let anything else slip. So congratulations on that too. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Since I was the person who put forward the Nonprofit Preservation Fund, obviously I want to provide more money to everything, particularly the things that I have worked, tirelessly on. This took 3 years for us to figure out. I do think taking a step back and thinking through what the next iteration of this looks like and what the timing looks like, particularly in the context of limited affordable housing dollars, is something that we should really think through. And I know the department is really thinking through that through your request of the county executive, of which we're not certain yet. And we'll find out, I guess, what he agrees to. Maybe we'll find out what you actually asked for too, at some point. I will note, council staff noted this, but the way that we structured this program, it took 3 years as we worked through with partners, with the department to figure this out. But it's a 7-year time horizon instead of a 5-year time horizon for the Housing Production Fund, for instance, because our nonprofit have a different model and a different structure, number one. And number two, these projects are different. The HPF is a construction loan, which is a very different dynamic in order to allow for a mixed income community to be able to have enough cash flow to be able to move forward and sustain itself and to to be solvent essentially without these dollars. For a nonprofit preservation deal, it's just a very different model, very different financing structure. It also pays at 2% and not at 5%. So the amount that's being returned on an annual basis is much lower. It's much lower, obviously, because that's the way that we make it work. That's the way that we don't kill the deals and prevent our nonprofit partners from actually do the work we're asking them to do. So I really appreciate the recommendation. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness from the department. I do think it should be part of the conversation, the context of what we talk about, but we do have to think about it in the context of the broader HIF and broader HIF deals, which have quite a bit of flexibility. And then also for the Housing Production Fund, which is a continued effort that I have been talking about. I know this committee has expressed its support of us increasing funding for that program, leveraging state dollars ideally. But I don't want to have a situation where Chicago, which followed what's now called the Montgomery County model as a model for mixed income housing and how state and local government should be tackling this issue, Chicago's doing $135 million in their program. So they're beating us at our own game here. So I do think that thinking through where our investments go in this moment and how we address those issues moving forward is going to be important. And I think that's part of the reason why we're not making final decisions on what we approve. And you have to see the broader context of the entirety of the affordable housing program for the county, the operating and capital budget, and everything that goes into it before we make final decisions. All right, let's continue.
All right. The last project in the housing CIP subcategory is the revitalization for troubled and distressed common ownership communities, a relatively new project that started 2 years ago. The executive is recommending a funding level of $10.5 million, which is about $500,000 higher than the previously approved 6-year level, and that largely reflects loan repayment proceeds again coming back from the initial disbursements. The packet has some data on funding that's been approved to date. Altogether, about $1.9 million has been approved and dispersed, or is pending disbursement, covering about a little over 600 units. And there's another $1.7 million of funding requests that are currently under review. So the program has been pretty fully subscribed to date. I'll turn it over to Director Bruton if he has anything to add to that.
Yes. So first of all, thank you all for funding this program when we brought it to you a few years ago. When I first came to the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, I had been in my work in D.C., I had worked with common ownership communities and those sort of in the more affordable range, condos and limited equity housing cooperatives. And I knew we probably all heard about the Seaside project condo down in Florida that collapsed because of lack of attention to deferred maintenance. And so it seemed an opportune time to we created a troubled or distressed common ownership community working group soon after I started, and we've been working through trying to identify troubled or distressed communities that could use technical assistance with things like governance and budgeting and regulatory compliance. But also what came out of that working group was the creation of this revolving loan fund. And what the fund does is it provides critical repair assistance, 0% interest with a very modest initiation fee, loan, not a grant, that with a maximum of $500,000 that is not intended to cover the entire cost of a project. It's an enabling fund to help these projects to add to the money that they already have, or to help effectively buy down the cost of the money that would be required if they have to take out a standard loan from a bank. We got started very quickly, and within the first fiscal year of this project, we already had committed $1 million of this. We have already expended funds, and Ramon, tell me if I get any of this wrong. We've already expended funds we've already paid out funds to 2 projects, and we have 3 more that we've made loan commitments to, and we have 5 more that are in the process. And our application process is not just a simple thumbs up or thumbs down. Many times, because these troubled or distressed common ownership communities, they have issues that got to them to this point. And so we require them to demonstrate that they have a working board that's following the rules, that they have a good collections record, so that people are paying their monthly fees. We make sure that they have a certain amount of reserves so they can cover at least 20% of the cost of the project. So this is not something to keep a common ownership community that's about to fail from completely failing. This is a carrot to get them to a position where, if they get the money from us, they can be on a pathway to becoming a well-run property that's not at risk for displacement due to some kind of condemnation because of a systems or a structural issue. And the longer the project has been in effect, or the loan fund has been in effect, we've had increasing numbers of applications as the word's getting out. We're going to do a training session for some of the largest management companies that assist common ownership communities to get the word out. And so we are very confident that we're going to be able to spend the funds at the rate that they were originally put into the the county's financial plan. And if we are in future years, if we have more good applications that are ready to go, we may come back to you in future years and ask for additional funding beyond the 10 million. But this is a very predictable repayment structure as compared to affordable housing gap financing, which is many times a cash flow repayment system. This is a very standard type of loan that has a very predictable repayment structure.
And so how are you structuring the loans and the repayment on these?
Ramon, do you want to? Oh, sorry. Ramon Espin, the manager of our Office of Common Ownership Communities.
Yes, good afternoon, council members. So the restructure payments that we've already have in place for the two projects that were mentioned earlier, there are 10-year repayments at 0% interest. So we normally look at their overall financial stability, their governance, and then also their budgets, because it does impact their budgets. This repayment does impact their budgets. So we take all of that information into consideration. I believe the way we wrote our criteria and guidelines, it could be anywhere from 10 years up to no more than 15 years of repayment. But so far, we have two projects that are already executed with a 10-year repayment plan.
Okay, so they pay it out essentially evenly over 10 years?
That is correct.
On an annual or monthly basis?
On a monthly basis, correct.
Monthly basis, okay. So you're giving them basically interest-free loan paid out over 10 years, and it can be extended up to 5 more years. Has to be fully paid back after 15.
Correct.
That is correct.
Okay. And I think it's a great program. I think it's very needed. I was supportive of it when it was first proposed. I really appreciate it. You're asking for $583 more dollars. This is, we're going to take up the final.
So there's the 10.5 million in 6 years. It's a mix of current revenue, about 7 million, and the rest is loan repayment proceeds. Mm-hmm. So staff's recommendation is to defer final vote on this, final recommendation on this project until we get the operating budget. We can look at the current revenue needs and operating and this project.
Yes, I'm just trying to understand the 583 delta. Is that?
So that's
because we're backfilling.
Not a request for new funding. That just reflects that when the loan repayments come back in, they will be reappropriated into the CIP. So it's no new funding. It's just asking for the revolving part of the loan to come back into the CIP.
Yeah, the additional
so those are the interest-free payments that are coming back essentially.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So you're asking to replenish.
Yes.
Right. So as we presented in the PDF, the FY 31 and 32, the funding source is the repayment proceed. So that's why the total project cost increased from the prior year, but the funding source is really solely depends on the proceed, not the additional funding request.
Okay, so that's really an accounting and appropriation authority issue. That's what I thought. I just wanted to flesh that out. The other question is, so how many loans per year are you expecting? I mean, you think this is basically assuming that you do 4 to 5 deals a year, right? It's a maximum or more maybe, but it's a maximum of $500,000. That's correct. The cap. So maybe it's 4 to 8 deals a year because some of these could be smaller than $500,000. I'm just trying to understand, like, what does the pipeline look like? How much money are you expending? Because I saw, the 3.1 million appropriated. Is that over 2 fiscal years?
Correct. FY
Yes.
25.
Okay. So essentially right now you're doing 1.5 million, 1.6 million a year. Was that even over those 2 years?
So far, yes. We've had in the second year, we had a couple of projects that were in at around $250,000 because that's all they required. So the number of projects, we will always have a relative cap on how many we can do in a particular year, given the funding availability. But the number will fluctuate based on how much each project needs.
Got it. And so what we're really talking about here when we take this up in the operating budget, just to be clear, is a little over $2 million in current revenue
In FY 27, correct.
that we would be deploying. So I just think it's important because I think a lot of people will be watching this. We're not going to have as much money in affordable housing as we would want. And I just think it's important that we clarify This is not an account that has $10 million sitting in it, waiting for interest-free loans to deploy, which are only deploying at $1.5 million a year currently. This is really whether or not we put up $2 million, give or take dollars, so that it's available for $1.5 to $2 million worth of common ownership, interest-free deals that will be paid back over 10 or 15 years. Is that
Yes,
fair?
sir.
Okay. I just want to be. There are a lot of moving parts in affordable housing, from the capital budget and the operating budget. I think a lot of times people think that there are pots of money that are available to fund the programs that they care the most about, which I appreciate. And all of these things are important. And I just wanted to make sure we clarified that there's not $8 million sitting in an account waiting. This is expected funding over the next 5 years beyond the current year, and it's really current revenue dollars that we're talking about,
Correct.
plus the repayments. And then we're giving you flexibility to reappropriate the repayments back into the fund, so that ideally we don't have to keep appropriating new money every year.
Yes, I mean, the goal is a revolving loan fund, and we will see over a several year period kind of what the general drawdown is each year based on the number of applications, and hopefully we will, the intent is to get to an equilibrium where we have a revolving loan fund of a certain size that can handle perennial applications, because this will be an ongoing issue over time as the common ownership communities in the county age.
Yeah, and I'll just note this is similar to actually the nonprofit preservation fund conversation. The idea here is, ideally after 10 years, you should be close to the full deployment, because you're staggering right now and deploying resources that should be paid back. And so every year, the loan repayments, once this ramps fully up, should be close to the full amount every year as the old repayments come back in on a monthly basis. But it takes a while to ramp that up for this to be fully self-sustaining, where no appropriation would be required. Right now, we do need a new appropriation, and then we will just be appropriating the repayment amount. So it'll be a net zero impact unless we increase the amount to the general fund, theoretically, or or the HIF, or whatever it's going to go into. The nonprofit preservation fund is kind of similar to that in the sense that we may want to increase it at some point, but the goal will be after 7 years, the full amount will be paid back. That can be redeployed. And then the question is, should we add to it in a staggered way over time to build that up? And then the repayment would happen in a staggered way. And so you'd have new money coming back in to redeploy for preservation efforts over time. I mean, theoretically, that's the goal for both of these revolving loan funds that happen on a longer time horizon. But I think that's the goal and the idea. The challenge is we've started a lot of these programs in the last few years, and so they're just in their infancy. And because they're challenging repayments, this is why we're doing it in government, because the private sector is not going to provide an interest-free loan for 10 years. It's a good deal for who's getting it. It's not a good deal for the government, except that we're serving the public interest. I mean, that's the key point here. Okay.
Yes.
Appreciate that. Sorry, go ahead, please.
Oh, I should also thank you all for in the current fiscal year's budget for funding Program Manager 2 position to manage this fund, and that Program Manager 2 position is also conducting the outreach to distressed common ownership communities, so that we can hopefully help some of them not to need this loan fund in the future by helping them with governance and technical assistance issues to help them better, to be better run organizations.
Great. All right. Well, appreciate that. Appreciate us fleshing that out a little bit. I just think it's really important for folks to understand. It's hard to understand that if you're just looking at the 6-year CIP and the numbers that are being presented of what's available and what's not and how these funds are being deployed. But I think that, at least I thought that was a helpful exercise to really think through that and flesh that out. So thank you. All right.
That's it on the housing side.
All right. Thank you very much to the department. We appreciate your work. And we're going to call up the Housing Opportunities Commission now. And I believe we have Mr. Anbinder. Yeah. We're with a 3-0 vote, just to clarify, a 3-0 vote, we're voting for the staff recommendations, which include taking up the items that we are voting on today and deferring the items, as we always do, that are impacted by the operating budget. So with that 3-0 vote, we accepted all of the staff recommendations for the housing item, and we're now going to move on to the HOC item. I'll turn it over first to Mr. Anbinder, and then I'll turn it over to Ms. Andrews and the team at HOC, and we can walk through this packet as well.
Good afternoon. The county executive recommends a total of $7.5 million in the 6-year CIP for the Housing Opportunities Commission. The expenditures in the executive's recommended CIP are associated with a single project, which is the Project Supplemental Funds for Deeply Subsidized HOC-owned units improvements. The recommended CIP also includes 3 projects, and these are projects numbered 1 through 3 in your packet, that do not have any expenditures in the 6-year period, but are required to be published in the CIP as legal disclosures. Projects 4 through 6 in your packet are projects for which HOC has requested increased funding, and each of these projects would be funded with current revenue. So the county executive has either entirely or partially deferred recommendations on these projects and will consider funding as part of the FY27 operating budget process. Council staff's recommendation is to approve the first 3 projects, items number 1 through 3 in your packet, which do not have any expenditures in the 6-year period, as recommended by the executive, and then for projects numbered 4 through 6, to go through those, give the committee an opportunity to ask any questions, but defer making a formal recommendation, as was the case in the DHTA items, until the executive issues an updated recommendation as part of the budget process. So before I go through the projects individually, happy to turn it over to the folks from HOC or back to the committee.
Why don't we turn it over to Ms. Andrews and the team? You can share any high-level comments that you'd like, and then we can go through the packet item by item, noting, as you just did, that for much of this we're going to defer, final decisions until the full picture with the operating budget comes to fruition. So.
Understood. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Chelsea Andrews, the president of HOC, and I'm joined with a number of my colleagues here this afternoon. On behalf of the board, our staff, and customers, I want to thank you all, especially this committee, for being a constant support of HOC. As your housing authority, we've had to weather some very unexpected circumstances over the past few years, and we are really grateful for the support that we've received to weather the storm. Of note, I do want to spend a few moments before we go through our projects just giving you an update in terms of how we're doing and how we're weathering the storm. HOC has been impacted by the domino effect of COVID, economic uncertainties, furloughs, federal program cuts, etc. And the domino effect is beginning to have an impact on HOC's financial position, which you will note was reflected in our new operational support requests. Specifically, we've experienced challenges related to our scattered sites portfolio, where we have the most vulnerable residents. But we've also been negatively impacted, unfortunately, by COVID-related non-payment rent and lease enforcement. Federal, state, and local rental assistance resources were depleted. As you know, we were a key proponent in helping to get those resources out of the door in FY23. The scattered sites performance has deteriorated over the last 2 fiscal years, going from a positive cash flow portfolio to millions of dollars in negative variances. As you know, we function as the housing of last resort. So we were the last landlord in court, beginning with lease enforcement and evictions, and have been working very closely with our resident services team to try to deploy resources. But overall, our portfolio has been impacted by non-payment of rent. Prior to COVID, for example, we would have had $1.5 million in tenant receivables, meaning that's how much we had outstanding. Since COVID, our balance has increased more than tenfold and sits at $16 million through the second quarter of FY26. Given the negative budget variances and lack of cash flow at our scattered sites properties, we've had to utilize reserves to offset losses over the past 2 years. Additionally, we just wanted to lift up. This is why the support is so critical as we work towards renormalizing operations, making sure that we're able to advance our mission. And so as we go through each of these requests, we know that these are capital requests. There are also operational requests that we've advanced. It was important to set the stage to give some context in terms of why we're making some new requests and why these requests are so critical at this time. Thank you.
Appreciate it. These are challenging times, to say the least, and appreciate the work that you and the team are doing. Mr. Ambiner.
Thank you. So the first item at the top of page 2 of your staff report is the HOC County Guaranteed Bond Projects. This is a continuation of the $50 million authorization limit for this project, which has been long-standing in the CIP. This project may be used for housing construction and permanent mortgage financing. And these bonds are backed by the revenues of the developments, by the pledge of subsidy funds if appropriate, and by the full faith and credit of the county. All developments financed under the approach in this CIP item are self-supporting. It is the opinion of the County Bond Council that inclusion of this project in the CIP is required, even though, again, no county funds are required over the 6 years. So council staff recommends approval as recommended by the executive.
County government has a AAA bond rating. That's pretty good. And this is like co-signing for your, loved one's lease to show that if for some reason the catastrophic happens and HOC can't cover the bond, that the county, is going to step in. And, we're here to back you up and make sure that we're getting and borrowing at the best possible rates.
Next item is the HOC MPDU Property Acquisition Fund, which is a $12.5 million revolving loan fund, which helps to ensure that HOC has the resources to respond promptly to moderately priced dwelling unit, or MPDU, acquisition. And again, HOC is authorized to use up to $12.5 million at any one time. Upon receipt of permanent financing, monies are returned to the fund for reuse. Again, council staff recommends approval.
Without objection.
And finally, the third of these 3 items with no expenditures in the 6-year period at the bottom of page 2 and top of page 3 of your staff report is the HOC Opportunity Housing Development Fund, another revolving fund that provides temporary financing to cover items such as project planning, site improvements, building and construction loan guarantees, construction financing, short-term financing, insurance for permanent financing, notes and bonds, etc. HOC is authorized to use up to $4.5 million from this fund at any one time, and the fund is repaid when permanent financing is obtained or when other sources of financing are made available from HOC's developments. Council staff recommends approval as recommended by the executive.
Thank you. And I think a friendly shout out and appreciation to our state partners is appropriate here, since half the initial request is now funded through a state program. So
Yes.
we appreciate that. So thank you to our state partners on that front.
Item number 4 is the first item in the staff report for which HOC requested funding that the executive has deferred making a recommendation on. This is the Elizabeth House demolition, which supports the county's portion of the expense for demolishing the Elizabeth House multifamily building as part of the larger Elizabeth Square redevelopment in Silver Spring. There was an additional cost to this project as the contractor identified an additional work scope and greater remediation of environmental conditions was required. The original anticipated cost of this project was $3 million, split equally between the county and HOC, and the county did appropriate $1.5 million towards this project in FY23. The additional cost to complete demolition that is not included in that $3 million is $1.8 million. HOC previously requested 1.5 of that 1.8 million as part of the amended FY25 to 30 CIP, which the council ultimately did not fund. Since making this request of the county in its submission letter in fall 2025, HOC has secured a state revitalization program grant of $750,000. At this time, there is no PDF that reflects that reduced need. But council staff expects that this would reduce the outstanding need for this project, and thus HOC's request of the county to $1.05 million from $1.8 million. Again, since this project would be funded with current revenue, the county executive has deferred making a recommendation on this project until the operating budget, and council staff recommends that the committee defer a vote until that time as well.
All right. Aforementioned appreciation to the state for their work here. We still have got work to do. This committee has expressed our expectation in the last budget cycle. Hopefully, we'll see this resolved and addressed. It's a operating budget question that I guess we'll hear back from the county executive. Before opening up to colleagues, any conversations that have occurred between HOC and the executive branch?
No, but I do want to just indicate, of course, this was an item that we raised last year, and we are thankful to the state for the support in terms of this grant. And also, we're hopeful that since the cost has been reduced, we can get some support from the county to help complete the overall cost of this project, which we've had to put on our line of credit. And so just hopeful that we can get the support here, and thank you for your consideration.
What's the current cost and what will be the cost through the end of the next fiscal year on that line of credit?
I would have to defer this question and or potentially come back with more information. But we can provide that. I don't want to speculate, but we can definitely provide.
Not a
you with
rush.
that
We're not making a
information.
decision on it today.
Yes.
And ultimately the county executive hasn't made a decision, but I do think in the context of what we're paying collectively as a public housing agency and county government, since we share in these obligations, and particularly in this one,
Yes.
it would be helpful, I think, to have that information of, what the choice is here, because nothing is really not a choice. It's one cost versus another cost. And I don't want to relitigate the whole conversation we had last year. I think we were pretty explicit in that, but I do think having all the details on the table as the decisions are being made would be helpful for us.
And we will provide those, definitely. Thank you.
And I would just suggest sharing that with the executive branch before the budget decisions, if we can avoid, confrontational conversation like we had last year, this year, prior to the final budget submission. There's still time, given the size of this item, in a $7.6 billion budget, to make final decisions. I'm not sure final decisions in print have happened, but time is tight. So if you haven't had any conversations yet, I would encourage you to have a conversation imminently. Let's turn it over to the executive branch.
I need to agitate OMB. We have had a conversation with HOC during the CE review of their request, and the CE will present his recommendation on March 13th.
Great.
Okay. Well, if there could be a specific conversation about the funding for this item, if you could share that information as a follow-up, if it wasn't already shared, it sounds like it probably wasn't. I do think that would be helpful to us. And I would just reiterate the idea that we're fighting publicly over, these funds, which are basically, decisions that have already been made and costs that have already been incurred, is frustrating and unfortunate, and hopefully we can avoid it this year like we had last year. Let me turn it over to Councilmember Jawanda.
Yes. Thank you.
Associate myself with that and look forward to hearing the county executive's recommendation. Glad the number is lower than it was last year. And we had discussion about the credit card, and glad you did what you needed to do to keep the demolition moving. If you could just give an update on the actual demolition of what we're paying for, of where the timeline of that, just to remember. I walk by it often, and
It's active right now,
so.
even as we were driving in. And so the demolition is definitely underway. The goal is to have the buildings down by spring. It was delayed a little bit because of some challenges in terms of various approvals that were needed, but we are back on track. And if you are driving by, you're seeing that it's reducing day over day. And so it's actively coming down and should be down by the end of April.
End of April. That's what I was looking for. Okay, great. All right. Thank you for that, and thank you for the update, and hope we can put this issue to bed so everyone can enjoy that area and we get done what we need to get done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we got to pay our bills. Okay. All right. Without objection on the HOC items, largely deferrals here because we've got to wait to see what happens with the operating budget, but appreciate the staff recommendations.
There was one extra item. It was the cider mill.
Yes, I believe there are two additional items.
Yes.
There's
Okay, let's continue then.
at the top of page 4 of your packet is the Cider Mill Apartments capital improvements, which supports maintenance at these apartments, which include 345 income restricted units and 516 market rate units. In the amended FY25 to 30 CIP last year, the council funded $250,000 in this item to install security equipment and lighting at the Cider Mill apartments. For this year, HOC requests $2.1 million, of which $950,000 would fund roof replacements for 10 buildings, and $1.15 million would fund balcony repairs. The executive, again, has deferred recommendations since this would be funded by current revenue, and council staff recommends the same for the committee.
Thank you, and I'll be quick. I think that everyone knows about Cider Mill, and there has been a joint effort across state, county, local to really support this community. I do just want to lift up and appreciate Councilmember Lukey and members of this committee for your support in regards to the security equipment, which has been installed, and in partnership with MCPD has resulted in significant decrease in crime and safety issues at the property. In FY26, the state budget, Delegate Wims did secure $60,000 to finance renovations at the soccer field. You may be familiar with a wonderful soccer program run by Coach Joe Hooks there. Using these funds, we were able to begin the renovations and we'll finish the project in the spring. Also, this session, HOC has partnered with Delegate Wims and Senator Nancy King to submit a bond bill for $65,000 to finance additional improvements to the soccer field and other recreational amenities at the property. And we're seeking philanthropic donations. So really just trying to make sure that this property has all the resources it needs. I will just also spotlight that the property has seen a full turn, in fact, received multiple awards from the Property Management Association community, and has won even Affordable Community of the Year. So definitely a full turn in terms of the property. This year we are requesting funds. I do want to just emphasize that roofs, in the past we've talked about balconies, but roofs have now turned into the issue that we're having to deal with multiple active leaks on an ongoing basis. Every repair is close to $6,000. And so as we look at these two requests, you will see that they're bifurcated for balconies and roofs. Roofs are really the the area where we need support. So thank you.
Thank you for that update. Appreciate the work of the district council member, our state partners. It's an all hands on deck approach. It's a major undertaking and a lot of safety issues and concerns, but appreciate the collaborative work.
Yes.
With that, without objection, we will accept the staff recommendation to defer.
And the final item, number 6, is supplemental funds for deeply subsidized HOC-owned units improvements. This is the item for which the executive has recommended the sum of his 6-year funds for the CIP at $7.5 million over 6 years. Beyond that, HOC has requested an additional $7.5 million. As President Andrews mentioned, this item addresses maintenance to certain HOC-owned buildings as well as scattered site units, and income from these properties has been insufficient to cover the cost of the renovation. HOC also notes that it has expended or obligated the full $1.25 million sum that was allocated for this use in FY26, and expects that it would be able to make use of a doubled amount each fiscal year of the $2.5 million that HOC is requesting to perform renovations to a greater number of units and reduce the backlog. So again, County Executive is deferring further recommendation. He is electing at this point to recommend $7.5 million, which represents a continuation of the funding from the previous CIP. But given that, again, any increase would be funded by current revenue, council staff recommends the committee defer recommendation.
And this just ties directly to my introduction in regards to the scattered sites portfolio. Also, of course, as units become available, we need to turn those units quickly so that we can get people housed. And so that's where these additional resources would go towards. And so with that, I think this is our last item. I do want to end on a positive note and thank the committee and the council for your support for HPF. Stay tuned for the invitation to the stage groundbreaking that should happen here this spring. It's our third project where we have been able to deploy the Housing Production Fund. And so definitely looking forward to celebrating with you all there. And thank you again for your consistent support.
Looking forward to that as well. With that, we have some items to take up in the operating budget discussions, and we will anxiously await the county executive's recommendation, which is happening a little early this year to accommodate some travel. So we will not have to wait as long as we might have. It's one of those weekends where it's either Monday or Friday, and we're going to get it Friday. So I look forward to that. And with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.